I would now like to call up Mike Schettinger to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Steve. Today we have a gentleman from AEP, and he's not going to talk about why did my power go off in Upper Arlington, which I asked him about. He's not going to talk about anything else that pertains to us and the electricity in our home per se, but he is the manager of the System Performance Analysis Group within the Transmission Department, and he is going to talk. Oh my, look at that. Wow. All right. How about we just do this? He is going to talk about the effect that the sun and solar flares have on our electrical grid. He has been with AEP Transmission for over 8 years in different planning and operation roles. He received his BS degree in electrical engineering from the University of Puerto Rico, his MS in electrical power engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, and his MBA from The Ohio State University. He was AEP's first cooperative engineering education program student selected from the University of Puerto Rico. So he has now paved the way for over 20 fellow students that have followed him to AEP. He is, well, let's talk about some things about Carlos that don't pertain to his professional life. Both of his parents have doctorates. His father is from Puerto Rico and his mother is from France. He is married to a German lady, so he's learning German. So he's got Spanish, French, English, and German, which is why his friends call him Euro-Rican. He has a brand new boy, about 3 months old, who is also learning all of these languages. He's been involved in water sports, playing water polo competitively when he was younger, and he was actually on the Junior Olympic water polo team for Puerto Rico as a teenager. Are you going to wear one of those beanie little hat thingies while you talk? I should have had you do that. Yeah. Rumor has it that above all these other things, he is taking dance lessons and becoming quite an avid salsa dancer. So, Joanne, I thought you might want to help him come up here. You guys can salsa up to the podium. Right. Well, help me welcome Carlos Casablanca to Columbus Rotary today.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for the introduction. So as Michael said, my name is Carlos Casablanca. I'm the manager of a group in AEP Transmission that is currently and has been studying for a while the impact of these geomagnetic disturbances on our electric power grid. This is a topic that has been getting a lot of attention recently. So my hope here today is to be able to give you a brief overview on the subject so that you can put into context a lot of the different things that you may be hearing in the media and elsewhere, or that you may already have heard. The approach I want to take to kind of give you this brief overview is first address, why the sudden interest? Why are we hearing about this all of a sudden? What's driving the interest? After that, I'll go over what are these geomagnetic disturbances, and I'll talk also how and why they impact our electric power grid. And finally, I'll touch on what is being done both at AEP and in the industry to address any concerns with these types of events. So why the sudden interest? Did something happen? Did something change? Has the sun started behaving differently than it has for millions of years? Simple answer is no. Nothing has really particularly changed in the last 10, 20 or more years. In fact, we've known about geomagnetic disturbances since the 1800s. What has happened, at least in my opinion, is three things. One is there seems to be a lot of interest in studying, assessing the risks, and preparing for what are called high impact, low frequency events at both the government and industry levels. High impact, low frequency events are events that basically don't happen very often, but when they do, they can cause a lot of chaos, a lot of damage, a lot of issues. Recent examples might be, the Japan earthquake and tsunami, the Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy. All of these things, cause a lot of damage, a lot of chaos. Second thing that's happening right now is we are currently in 2013 at or near the most recent solar cycle. And what that means is that there is an expectation that we've already seen or will be seeing shortly a lot of activity coming from the sun, perhaps aimed at the Earth. And finally, there seems to be just an overall interest and drive to renew the electric power grid. And associated to this, anything that can be done to harden the grid, to protect it against external threats, be they man-made or natural in cause, is seen as a good thing. So that's my opinion as far as why we're hearing about this topic all of a sudden, when in reality, this is not something new. So what are these geminate disturbances? The sun is a very active place, and it is constantly spewing out these energetic particles, this plasma, this stuff that when it interacts with the Earth's magnetic field, causes the so-called geminate disturbances. Also, I may refer to them today as GMDs, or solar storms, or geomagnetic storms. All of these things are meant to, they mean the same thing. And the reason why the sun spews out all these particles and plasma, in every direction, the causes are, these things that are listed here: solar flares, coronal holes, coronal mass ejections. I'm not educated enough to explain to you why the sun does that. I just know it does, and that's what we consider in our studies and our simulations. So, why is the electric grid impacted by these events? What drives this? And so, to understand why this happens, you need to consider that there's a sequence of actions and reactions, a sequence of steps that take place when a large amount of these energetic particles hit the Earth, when they start interacting with the Earth's magnetic field. So the sequence of steps is as follows. So the sun's particles hit the Earth, they start interacting with the Earth's magnetic field, and they start causing the Earth's magnetic field to start shifting, changing, bending a little bit, adjusting. So basically the Earth's magnetic field is responding to that. As the Earth's magnetic field is changing and adjusting and moving, it is causing currents to be induced in the Earth's crust. So then, the thing from the top is now causing issues in the Earth's crust. Those changes in those induced currents in the Earth's crust then induce an electric field at the surface of the Earth, a relatively minor electric field that wouldn't hurt us, personally, like us people. But then it is this electric field that is induced at the surface of the Earth that drives or causes some unintended currents to flow on transmission grid equipment. And that is what causes the issue. And keep in mind that all of this, the sequence of steps happens very quickly and very dynamically, so it comes and it goes, it comes and it goes. It's not on and off, it fluctuates. It's like the ocean, it's waves. So how is the electric grid impacted by these unintended currents? And pretty simply is, the electric grid was not designed to handle them. As you probably all know, our electric power grid works on AC, alternating current, and that's what it was designed for. But these unintended currents are more like DC currents, direct current. And basically, when you mix the two, then you start having some issues. So listed here are basically three common issues that are attributed to when these unintended DC-like currents get mixed in with the grid, in our day-to-day operations. The first thing that can happen is basically, some of our equipment can begin to overheat. Obviously, if these currents are persistent over a significant amount of time, they'd be there 30 minutes, 1 hour, or more. So it has to be persistent for a significant amount of time. Second is these DC-like currents also begin to cause issues in transformers in our power grid. And transformers are a very critical piece of our power grid. And what happens in these transformers, and I'll spare you all the technicalese behind it, is when they see these DC currents, they begin to saturate. And when they saturate, they start causing a lot of electrical noise. And it is this noise that can cause nearby control equipment in the power grid to malfunction and to stop responding. That's an issue. The third thing that can happen due to these unintended currents is that the losses, the energy losses in the system suddenly increase significantly and very rapidly. And that basically can cause voltages to drag down and cause a blackout. So that's also a possibility. So examples of notable or recent events, not so recent also, but events that are noteworthy are listed here. We start off with the 1859 Carrington event, which is thought by some to be the largest geomagnetic disturbance ever recorded in human history. And in 1859, we didn't have a power grid, but we did have a telegraph system. So what was noticed during this event was there were a lot of issues with the telegraph system. Some telegraph stations caught fire because of these currents. And another thing that was noticed a lot was that aurora lights in the night sky were visible as far south as Florida and even Cuba. And usually these lights are only, they stay up in the Canada or maybe northern U.S. region, depending on, if there's any solar activity going on. So that was noticed during this event. Another notable event was the 1921 solar storm, lower in magnitude than the Carrington event, but still caused issues in the telegraph system. However, it only caused issues in the telegraph system in Europe. It didn't cause any in the U.S. Not sure why, but that's what's documented. It also caused aurora lights to appear at pretty low latitudes. After that, we have the 1989 Quebec Blackout, which was caused by a significant geomagnetic storm. And what happened there is basically you had this geomagnetic storm that caused these unintended currents to flow in the power grid up in Quebec. These currents saturated several of the transformers, which caused a lot of electrical noise, and about 6 or 7 pieces of critical equipment in their system started malfunctioning and basically went offline. And as soon as those 7 things went offline, the grid collapsed because it just couldn't support the load that was flowing in the system. And finally, we have the 2003 Halloween event, which basically obviously lower in intensity than the Carrington event in the 1921 solar storm, but it caused in the U.S. It caused, I want to say, some odd behavior. People noticed that there were some high levels of DC-like currents being measured here and there, and some alarms were triggered here and there of things that operators needed to pay attention to. But in the end, no major issues in the U.S. The only place that was particularly affected by that event was in Europe. There was one transmission line that went out of service, again, because equipment misoperated, or stopped working correctly due to that electrical noise that we talked about due to transformer saturation. Now, having said all this, my intention is not to send you off running to the hills. I want to make sure you put it all into perspective. I think it is very important to know that for the Earth and the electric power grid, particularly, to be significantly impacted by one of these events, a lot of things have to line up almost perfectly. The sun, first of all, when it spews out all this plasma and energetic particles, it has to be aiming at the Earth. It could be aiming anywhere else in space, and we wouldn't be affected at all. Second is, the Earth's magnetic field also is changing on a day-to-day basis. It changes slowly, but it changes. And it also has to be lined up in a particular way to be the most vulnerable to these types of events, these types of particles coming from the sun. At the same time, it is also, it's another variable is at what day and time this event occurs, because in different days and different times of the day, the grid is configured differently and there's different amounts of loads, so it makes it more or less vulnerable to these types of events. And finally, where you're located on the Earth, what latitude and longitude also plays a lot into how much you're going to be affected. And I've only highlighted here some of the perhaps the most critical parameters, but there's additional parameters that really affect how much one of these events will affect the grid. And also, I want you also to keep in mind that if you think about the 1989 Quebec Blackout, which is perhaps of the four that I listed is the one that perhaps scares some folks. 83% of customers were back online within 9 hours. So the event, you could say, was significant but not cataclysmic, such as Hurricane Sandy, such as Katrina, such as the Japan earthquake and tsunami. So really, you gotta take it, put it into perspective of what the causes and effects might be. Now, having said all this, I'm not trying to play it down. There's a lot of industry work and collaboration going on to address any type of concerns with this topic and this phenomenon. And it can best be summarized with 3 words. Both AEP and the industry are monitoring, modeling, and mitigating to address concerns with this subject. So on the monitoring end, what we're doing is we're monitoring the sun's activity pretty much live using government satellites and also government observatories that track the sun's behavior. We're also deploying our own sensors in the grid so that we can know in real time how our system's being affected by these unintended currents. We're actually measuring these unintended currents, which we didn't normally do before. On the modeling aspect, for a while now we have been developing models of the grid so that we can study how these different scenarios of storms, different solar storm scenarios, so we can study their impacts and also assess and address any concerns ahead of time. And finally, on the mitigation end, we are pretty much improving our equipment designs so that they can either be more resistant or unaffected by these unintended currents. Because as I said, from the get-go, the grid is not designed to handle these DC-like unintended currents that are caused by these storms. Now, very critical at the very bottom, there's a lot of industry collaboration going on this subject. Everybody from FERC to the utility level, people in between, our research institutes, a lot of people are involved in this. There's a lot of discussion going on. So, this is not being ignored by any means. There's a lot of attention. So to summarize my brief talk today, what I would like you to probably remember as you walk out is, first off, there's a lot of industry and government interest in high impact, low frequency events and preparing for them. Geomagnetic disturbances, geomagnetic storms are one type of high impact, low frequency events that we are looking at very carefully. And a lot of industry work and collaborations going on to address any type of concerns with this phenomena and mitigate any potential effects. That's all I have. Thank you very much. What questions do you have for me? Okay, you first.
Bring up another issue that there's been talk of threat to the United States from outside interests, terrorists, are not necessarily missiles, but rather disruption of our magnetic grid. Can you address that issue?
Yes. So that is an excellent question, and actually I thought about putting something up. So the question is, is anything being done to address external threats due to, I think what you're referring are electromagnetic weapons, EMP pulses. And basically, it's a great question because I actually thought about putting 1 or 2 slides on this today, because there's actually a link between this topic of geomagnetic disturbances and the topic of electromagnetic pulse weapons. Some of the effects on the grid are the same. Electromagnetic pulse weapons are actually kind of tricky. They're a little bit more complex. They do a little bit more. But some of the effects overlap with geomagnetic disturbance effects. So by protecting and hardening the grid against geomagnetic disturbances, we're actually also addressing some of those concerns. And some individuals have personal opinions, and they think that the whole reason the government is pushing the geomagnetic disturbance topic is because they actually want, through the back door, protect us against electromagnetic pulse weapons. So there's an overlap, and we're also looking at it. A good question. You, sir.
More specifically, I understand that the big transformers that would be impacted by a terrorist attack of that type are not even made in the United States. There's as much as a 6-month backlog that
So that is correct. Basically, there are concerns that, what if all our transformers get damaged? How long is it going to take to bring them back? And it is true that sometimes the lead time on some of these transformers, depending on which one you're looking at, could be 6 months, 3 to 6 months, or maybe 12 months. It really varies. So the answer there is, that is true, but utilities in general, and AEP in particular, have a lot of spares on hand. And one thing, spares obviously take a while to move, but we have them in-house. We have them stored at different locations, and obviously we can't say where they are because we don't want to damage or anything. But we have spares available that we can deploy when needed if any transformers fail. In addition, one thing to keep in mind is, and I didn't go into details, but it would be extremely unlikely for all of our transformers to be damaged during a particular event, be it an electromagnetic pulse or be it a geomagnetic disturbance. So the number of spares we need doesn't have to be significant. In addition, AEP right now is going through the process of replacing some very old equipment, some very old transformers that we're going to actually keep on hand for that same scenario. So we will have a good level of sparing in case any type of event occurs. Hopefully that answers your question. Right. You, sir.
How vulnerable are data centers to these events?
So data centers, and how vulnerable are data centers to these events? You refer to geomagnetic disturbances or electromagnetic pulses?
Either.
Good question. So geomagnetic disturbances, I think, probably very unlikely of any effects because one aspect of this phenomena is that it acts on very long distances, and a data center is very small. So the solar aspect, I think, is minimal. The EMP aspect, I think, is more significant. And it depends what type of data center it is. There are things that you can do, and I'm not sure whether other utilities do it or even AEP does it, but you can shield against EMP. It just requires you to, put in a certain type of mesh or protection around your building. So I'm not sure if we're doing it. I'm not sure if anybody else is doing it, but it can be addressed. Yes.
We had the 2003, August 2003 problem with the U.S. grid going down. What is being done nationwide to improve our grid?
Okay, so the question is, we had a blackout in 2003 in New York, and the question, I mean, yeah, a lot of people think of New York, but you're correct. It was in a lot of states. And the question is, what is being done to improve our grid? I can say that there's a lot being done to improve our grid. I can speak on behalf of AEP, basically saying we're going through a transmission renewal effort right now to replace a lot of old assets that have a lot of issues and that are, don't have the capacity to handle events such as the one in 2003. Industry-wide, I believe there's a similar drive to renew our transmission grid, in particular, which actually was the one that triggered issues in the transmission grid, triggered the 2003 blackout event. And finally, I think even the government has acted on that. I don't know if you're familiar, but they recently issued an order. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issued FERC Order 1000 not too long ago that is basically pushing utilities to compete for improvements in the grid. And the whole point of that order, in my opinion, has been that the government is a little frustrated with perhaps how the grid is being developed and also grown and fixed. And so they're pushing for competition. Because I guess we all know that historically utilities have been very regulated and their service areas and service territories have been protected, so they were always responsible for fixing their own problems. What's going to happen in the next couple of years when this order kicks in is that we're going to have to compete against other utilities for business in fixing perhaps problems in our own footprint. And I think that's going to drive a lot of attention to the issue and topic of grid protection, grid renewal, grid resiliency, and it probably is going to improve things. Hopefully that answers the question. Yes, next question.
Is there any way to predict short-term peak of one of these events and to actually mitigate the effect of it, or does it happen sort of continuously?
Great question. So can we predict these types of events and mitigate it quickly and before it really causes any issue? So yes, The good thing is that we have satellites up in space that are looking at the sun constantly. So whenever you saw the animated image, there was a big wave that came out of that. Whenever one of those, we see one of those from the sun, it takes between 24 and 72 hours to reach the Earth. So we immediately get advance notice of, hey, something's coming. You can do several things to mitigate their impact very quickly. And I don't want to get too much in the technical aspect of things, but for example, you can open very long transmission lines that are not necessarily critical, and that helps stop the flow of that unintended current on the transmission grid. You can do that. You can also, what we like to call is bring in generating reserves, because what happens is, the issue with blackouts, the effect with blackouts is losses in the system go up very rapidly. But if you have enough what we call reactive power resources to support the voltage online, you can address those. You can prevent the blackout from occurring. So yes, there are different things that we can do if we get advance notice, and that's why as I said, we're monitoring these solar events on an ongoing basis in real time. So if anything's coming our way, we're ready for it. Any more questions?
There's a lot, I think, going on in this whole area. Everything from neighborhood transmission batteries to, how flexible and responsive? Because I think with a lot of the big utilities and things, kind of plugging along, doing things the way they've done for 100 years. I think how really flexible and responsible are utilities being to address those kinds of innovations that are coming?
Very good question. So I guess the general overarching question is, what are utilities doing to be more in tune with modern times and deploying new technology to basically keep the lights on under any circumstance? And my impression is we're doing a lot. A lot is being done at both the transmission level and the distribution level. So in the transmission level, we're deploying, we're renewing the grid. That's one thing that we're doing. We're also deploying sensors to detect issues with equipment ahead of time so that we can take it out for maintenance before it fails. So basically, avoiding the outage. On the distribution end, you probably have seen a lot about AEP Ohio and other, parts of AEP that are deploying this smart grid technology. And the idea behind the smart grid technology is, again, to keep the lights on under any type of circumstance. And if there's an outage, to know of it immediately so that we can respond quickly. Some of the types of equipment that's being deployed, if I'm not mistaken, is, for example, and I don't want to get again too much technicalese, but our distribution system is typically radio. So there's typically only one source of energy flowing into everybody's homes. However, what's being done with smart grid, if I'm not mistaken, is we're adding tie points to other feeders, to other energy sources, so that if there's a failure with the main source feeding one distribution feeder, it automatically switches over to the other one. So you may get an outage, but it'll be a couple seconds only. And in addition to that, distribution area is not my area, but I know we're doing a lot with smart grid, and I guess if Pablo was here, he'd probably talk more about that.
Update us, if you could, on the AEP scrubber situation, and nuclear is certainly so expensive that you're not going to go into that, but with low sulfur coal and all, and the atmospheric impact of your coal-fired plants, where are you with updating your scrubber?
So the question is focused on generation and our scrubbers, and I will politely decline the question simply because I don't think I have the know-how to respond to it. That's AEP generation. You have to bring another speaker for that. Any more questions?
What is the voltage of this current that is generated here at the front?
Yeah, it's about, so it ranges, it can be about, I'm going to say 5 volts per kilometer to maybe 100 volts per kilometer. It's in that range. So it's very low voltage, and you have to be, it acts over long distances. Does that answer your question? All right. Any more questions?
Does that voltage affect the radio transmission that occurs? I've heard conversations about ground conductivity affect how far a radio signal radio station might be heard.
No. How far, so sorry, I will repeat the question. So the question is, do these voltages in the Earth's crust and the surface of the Earth affect, I guess, radio propagation? Good question. I don't know, but I can tell you this. What I've heard, and some of the reports have been doing these large geomagnetic disturbances, is that some folks, for example, folks who use CB radios or shortwave communication, they can talk to very, very far away places that they normally can't, because what the effect of all these particles in the Earth's atmosphere, within the Earth's magnetic field does, it changes the characteristics of radio propagation. So it can make sometimes radio communications cut out, but it sometimes make radio communications go really far, much farther than normal. But as far as what I know, it's always been related to changes in the magnetosphere of the Earth, not issues with the ground. But there may be some effects, but I'm not familiar with them. Sorry.
I've heard the term of ground conductivity.
True. Yeah, but I'm not familiar how that would affect telecommunication issues. Sorry. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Carlos, on behalf of Columbus Rotary, I want to thank you for being our speaker today. Give you a gift from Argo and Laney.